Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our weekly webinar. This is Patrick at Qdabra, and I have with me today Mel Clemente and Dawn Labatten. Mel, can you say a quick shout out to everyone?
Hey everyone, hope everyone's having a good Thursday morning and have already had their coffee.
Dawn, what are you drinking there? It must be evening. Have you moved on to something lighter?
Haven't yet.
Not as dark. I've got my black coffee here. Hope everyone's doing well today. We've got a new webinar for everyone. We try to do these every week, and this week we have something that is new. We're talking about how to map fields from forms to SharePoint columns, and there are a few special columns that we have in SharePoint for people, for lookup values, for dates, and for metadata. Today we're going to be talking about a few of those. Before we get started, I just want to do a quick poll and ask those, first of all, thank you all for joining. Great to see a wonderful audience here today. We've got quite a few people. But I want to ask everyone quickly, whether you're using people pickers in the form or not. Very simple question, just yes or no. And we'll get a quick show and tell, or show of hands, on how many people are actually using this. It looks like about 63. We're tracking about 2/3 of you right now, and we've got about 80% voted, so that's great. Thank you for doing that. I'm going to, so about 2/3 of you then have people pickers in your forms. And let's take a look at how many of you are using lookup values. Now, lookup value is a drop-down. Let me show you an example. A lookup value is, let's see, a lot of demos today, but the lookup value is this clickable link. You can't see this because I still got the poll going, but it's a clickable link in a column that you can see. In fact, when the poll is done, I'll show it to you. It's 87% of you are using them, and we got about 60% voted, so thanks for that. So here's what I was trying to show earlier. Let me share this out again here. Wrong screen. Why did it flip to the other screen? No idea. But hopefully you can see my screen now. So these are the lookup values that we were talking about. So we have a very simple list here we're going to be demoing from today. These lookup values are clickable, just like the usernames are. But anyway, thanks for being here. And I guess one more thing I wanted to ask everyone before we get going is how are you using the people picker data in your forms? Are you using it for workflow? Are you using it just because you want to see the person there in the list or the library? Or are you using it in some other way? So if there's a chat window here, and you can actually put a question in to the question section, and we'll see it. So I don't think chat's going to work, but if you do the question thing, I'll see it, and just type in there how you're using the people picker. Most of you are probably using it for workflow. Looks like that's what Donald's doing. Thanks, Donald, for being so quick on the draw there. But I just wanted to ask you, how do you want to use that people picker information in your SharePoint workflow, SharePoint list, SharePoint library? So we're integrating InfoPath with SharePoint today, and we're looking for the scenarios and how you're leveraging the data in the people picker to do some kind of processing in SharePoint, right? That's the whole purpose of this webinar today. We're going to show you how we did the lookup columns. This is really easy. We're going to show you how we integrated with people data in SharePoint, and not only query it, but also submit it. And that's, like I said, I think it's good for workflow and this IntelliSense, this kind of linking that you see in the list. But maybe there's another scenario out there. Looks like we've got a few more people mentioning assignments. That's great, Agnel. Thank you for mentioning that. Yes, workflow assignments would be a good one. Workflow also, Bob Easter using it for workflow. Great to see you back here today. And then Dick Penny is using it to get email address. That's great. And obviously email address is important to send email in the workflow. So after we show you that, we also have a demo to show you how to get date values. So you got date values and submitting to a calendar as well. Next week, we'll be coming back to show metadata. We couldn't get metadata working today. We tried. It's a little more complex. We're going to try it again next week. So if you're here for the metadata, we can get it working. We'll show you that next week. It'll be a short webinar next week. Please come back for that next week. So before we do the demos, just a quick shout out to our marketing department. Why are we doing these webinars? Well, mainly to show you tips and techniques that we find useful. We do a lot of forms. We do a lot of solutions here. We're a consulting company. We also have built a tool called Forms Viewer to help you stop the samsara, stop the, what's the word I want to use? When you're spinning around because Microsoft said they're no longer continuing InfoPath and everyone's asking you, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Well, you can stop all the, the fear, the uncertainty, the doubt. You can stop the negativity by just saying, look, Qdabra's got our back. We've got this migration path for you called Forms Viewer. It is a very low cost migration path, zero cost ideally, and most of the forms convert over just fine. So there's no changes to the form needed, and there's no need to actually change your existing form library. You can just leave it as is. And we've got better performance, more features, and so on and so on and so on. We've been talking about this for quite a long time, so that's the end of the ad. Okay, now on to the webinar. So the webinar, we're talking about lookup values first. Let's take a look at this. I'm going to have Mel quickly talk to this while I find out how the cat got in the room. So I've got a kitten in the background I need to deal with, but Mel, can you actually talk to this real quick? And actually, I hate to do this, but I'm going to make you presenter while I go deal with the stowaway. Do you mind if I do that real quick?
I don't mind at all. Sure thing.
Okay. It's a demo. It's live. How did the cat get in here? I have no idea, but we're going to make you presenter, and I'll be right back.
Okay. All right, I hope everybody can see my screen. Don, can you see my screen? Quick check, please.
Yep. I can see
All right, cool. Cool. Yeah, so we've built this quick little quick sample here. We call this the People Picker Submit sample, just for you guys to see maybe, how you're or in which ways you can use the concept, the idea to submit form data to a special column called when you have a list that has this person or group type, it's kind of, we call it a special column because you're not able to just simply submit a person or group type of field from an InfoPath form into a person or group column in a list or a library, right? And there are special techniques behind that, which we're going to show later. I think Patrick is going to show that, but this, let me walk you through this sample form. So here on form load, we are querying a list, and I'm going to actually take you to that list. 1 second here. Don't know why it went there. Training.
And I'm back to you, Mel. Thanks for filling in for me.
Sure. So I'm just taking them to the list, which I'm not sure why it's not.
Do you want me to share back?
Yeah,
no.
yeah.
Okay. It seems like it's going pretty well on your machine.
Okay, so we've got this people picker list, and this is where we're getting data and submitting them back, when you modify and you want to submit them back. So on form load, we pull that data in, and if I click on the icon right here, it allows me to edit that existing line item, modify the user, and maybe move that user to a department, to a different department than where he's currently at, or even add more users to this. Like, I'm going to add myself right here. And when I try to submit it, this will refresh. That will mean that my changes have been successfully submitted back to the list. And let me just refresh here to show you that.
And just for those of you that are looking at this and trying to figure out what we're doing, and I was kind of in the same boat with my jaw agape here a little bit earlier, because it's really a dashboard form that we're showing. The technique, though, is used in your forms for approvals, for workflows, for that kind of thing. But this sample that we're showing for the demo is really not a form. It's more of a dashboard just to manage people. But the same technique of mapping those people to the column, and in this case multiple people, will work just fine. And the multiple people example is really only valid when you're doing like parallel workflow, or you want to send out a workflow for multiple people. And we've done a webinar on parallel workflows recently. We didn't use this technique for that. We used this child form. But this would be another way to do it. You have several people that you want to assign to. Now in this case we're associating them with a department, so it's a bit contrived. This is more of a dashboard example as opposed to a real form. But I hope you can understand how you would use it in a real form. You'd use it in some kind of an assignment block for your workflow to assign to somebody, and then the workflow would take that ID and send an email, and if there were multiple people, it would send to multiple people. Why don't you try Hillary's name? Hillary's above, I guess. We got kind of a very, on our training site here, we don't have a lot of people, but you can see Mel's able to associate those. Mel, can you actually talk a little bit? Can you switch to the designer and show them how you did this?
Sure. Okay, so I've got it up in my InfoPath designer here, and I guess you can figure it out with the layout there. This just, allows you to modify this line item, and that shows this editable section down here. But the special sauce in this form is being able to submit your person or group type into, like I said, person or group type field in the InfoPath form into a person or group column in the SharePoint list. And you can't, just do that by mapping this person or this people picker field to that column just like that. So we have a separate just a string type of field here. We call it the people picker submit, and this is what is actually submitting to that person or group type column.
So Mel, why can't you do it? Why can't you just submit the people picker? What's the reason for that? Why can't you just promote that property? I know it's a stupid question, but I got to ask it, right?
I think you can promote that from if you're to your library, but if we're submitting to a list, that mapping tool just don't allow, from like right here. I guess that it's being special column. Well, I don't know.
Yeah, so the column, if it's promoted, it's not going to have that special GUI that SharePoint knows to present it as an IntelliSense, this kind of a smart link kind of thing, right? Because it's promoted from InfoPath, and InfoPath does not create special columns, right, when you publish. And the other issue is that if you've got more than one, you can see it in Mel's schema. Mel, go back to the schema for a second. The people picker is inherently able to handle multiple items, and that's why you see it's repeating PC person there. The person node is repeating. But you can't promote that to a SharePoint library because of the same issue with promoting other repeating data. You can only have one item. And so in this case, we're actually mapping it to a separate list, and we're actually adding all of the people associated with that department to that one line. In the case where we're doing a parallel workflow, we would want to create separate lines for each person. But in this sample, we're actually only creating one row in that list. So it's a bit contrived, but the idea is to show you how to map data to a special column that was created in SharePoint to show off these people and allow you to smart click on them or allow them to be used for workflow. And the way we do that is we concatenate these account IDs together. The account IDs are part of the people picker control. If you concatenate them together, then they will show up correctly in those smart columns. Now the other thing that Mel's doing is actually mapping it to the list. Mel, can you show them, once again, I think you were about to do this earlier, but can you continue and describe how the mapping happens?
Yep, I'll try. I'm going to try to find the mapping first, Patrick.
Well, I can do it. Hold on. I'll just share my screen.
Thanks.
Okay. Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen now. When we submit the data, as you can see here, we are doing this this concat to get them all in the right format. And with the account IDs, what you have to do is you have to use this double eval technique. And what this does is it actually takes a variable length, so you have multiple values potentially in your people picker, right? We said we can have more than one person. And what this eval technique does is it actually takes any number of items in a repeating group and it concatenates them together. So it's very hairy. It's just a crazy little expression here. So many of you are familiar with this. The key thing with this double eval, you can forget the eval thing here and you can kind of forget all the goo at the end. The key thing here is this thing in the middle that is the delimiter. This delimiter is what we're using to concatenate these account IDs. So there's all the account IDs that are not equal to null, so anything that's valid, we wouldn't want an account ID that was not there. So I guess if you can type in some random value and it won't resolve, you'll get an account ID that's blank. So that's why we have that. And then between each one of those account IDs, we're adding this :#, -1, $, and that's to conform to the special, SharePoint people picker formatting requirements. Does that make sense? And then Mel is going to describe how we actually do the mapping. The mapping is this separate step here, and we are using Q-rules for this. Full disclosure, right? This technique is to map to a separate list, requires Q-rules, but you do not need necessarily to map it to a list. You could leave it in the library, although it wouldn't show up in a column because the columns are only created from within SharePoint. They're custom columns. You can't create these people picker columns from InfoPath. So you do have to submit to a list or a library using this command. And this command then uses a mapping file. And Mel, I'm just going to pull that up so you can talk to that momentarily here. Do you want to talk to that?
I can.
You don't want to, though. Okay, so you can, but you don't want to. Let's see. So this is the mapping file. Here's a list that we're using, and this is a tool that we use to create mappings. And this just tells InfoPath how to map the data in the form. In this case, we're mapping this concatenated people picker submit column to the people column, and there's a SharePoint list ID, and then there's also department information. So the department information doesn't have to have anything special added to it. It will work just fine. But the key thing with the department is that you need to make sure you're storing it as a value, as an ID. So if you look at this drop down here, the lookup value for the department is really just the secondary data connection. So on load, we have a query. We query the data connection to get those departments. That's on load every time the form opens. Hopefully you can see that. There it is. And then we just make sure that we are associating the drop-down with that list, right, this list of values, and then use the ID. Make sure you have the ID selected, and then it will actually show the correct department. If you don't select the ID, it will not do that. It won't work if you just have title for both of these. You need to have ID for the value. That's the key thing. Otherwise, it works just fine mapping to a lookup value list. Let's see, any questions on that before we move on? So once again, lookup values are easy. You're adding a data connection, you're setting the drop-down properties to the ID, and then you're using the submit to SharePoint list command to map them. For querying, it's easy as well, and in this case, we're doing it to create this correspondence between the list and the form. So we're querying it to get the existing settings so that we can write them back. In your case, you could query the people picker to get modified by or created by. Those are two custom columns that SharePoint adds to every library or every list, and you could query those to pull those into the form, but it's not a huge scenario. You're usually going to be probably submitting the people pickers and not actually querying them. And so to submit them, once again, to recap, you need to go into the form and make sure that the people picker properties are set correctly. And if you look at this, we've got the people picker. This is a calculated value. But if I click on the people picker, where's the people picker? So we don't even have the people picker in here, do we, Mel?
The one
It's the one below.
below.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you. Thanks, Don. I'm glad you guys are here. Well, thanks for doing all these demos too. So here you can see that, let's see, am I doing the right thing, Don?
Yeah.
For some reason I thought I'd see some different, I thought I'd see a SharePoint site there. But anyway, the point of this comment is make sure you select repeating items if you want to have multiple people in groups. You want to select that separate one right here. This is something you may not be familiar with, but there are properties for the people picker, and if you do want it to store multiple values, you do have to go in there and set it up that way. And then once you do, you're going to create a separate field in the form for the concatenated values, and that field right now is people picker submit. And this field actually doesn't have a default value, so we're only setting this when we hit submit button, and you can see it's setting the field's value here, people picker submit, and it's setting it equal to this double eval of the existing people picker values. So if we click on this account ID, you'll see that that's coming from the people picker data source, and it's concatenating all of those that are non-blank, and it's putting this special delimiter between them. So that's the technique. We're going to send you this sample. Just fill out the survey at the end, and we'll package up this sample for you. Mel, any other comments on this technique?
I think you've covered everything.
Well, thanks for being here, and thanks for doing the sample and making it look so beautiful. Mel was able to make this form look really good last night. I'm really happy that she was able to do that. We do have some cool techniques here showing how to insert items into a repeating structure using buttons. So Mel's done some really cool markup here, and we may even show this working in Forms Viewer next week. But it looks really good, Mel, in the browser. In fact, once again, in the browser, how does this look? Just going to open this up here. Here's how it looks in the browser. So it looks really good. Okay, so let's move right on here. And Mel, looks like you're still unmuted, but that's cool. We did put a link in here in the presentation, which we'll also send you to a blog post that Hillary did describing this technique in more detail. It's basically what we just said. So there's a link right there. You can click on it when you get the PowerPoint. So let's take a look at querying dates real quick, and then I think we're done. We'll answer your questions. If you do have questions, please feel free to add those at any time. We'll get to those in a second. So if we're querying dates, there's really two things to mention here. Number one is if you're querying a date from SharePoint, like modified or created, which are dates in a SharePoint library. They're automatic custom columns that SharePoint adds to the library, just like modified by and created by. You're going to get the date and the time, and most of the time will be 000, it'll be midnight. And sometimes you don't want that. So the simple technique here is to just remove everything after this T. When you get the date back from SharePoint, it'll be in a XML format, which is the date in a year-month-day, and then there'll be a big T to designate the time, and then you'll have like 0:0:0, which is midnight is the default. And you don't want that necessarily in your form, so if you want to strip out the time because it's not there, it's not valid, you can just use this substring before technique. So I'm not going to demo that because it's pretty simple. What I do want to show you is this technique for submitting data to a calendar list. And we have here a calendar list. So here's our calendar. And now this is different from a list with a calendar view. So what I did here was I went to Site Contents and we created a new app. We clicked on Add an App and we clicked on Calendar down below. And this gave us a calendar. And of course it's very similar to a list with a calendar view, but it's I think it's slightly different. I'm not actually sure. But anyway, it does require a little bit of extra work here to get this thing to integrate. And the way you do it in your form, let's just see the demo first here. So I've got a demo, and I'm going to add a webinar for next week. Actually, we're doing a webinar, weekly webinar, and it's virtual again, obviously. And we're going to put this in for 6/8, and the description is going to be metadata mapping, right? That's what we're going to show next week. And you can see here that the default value there is at midnight, but we're just going to leave that. Actually, we're going to change this here, and we'll make it 8 a.m. That's our normal start for these things. And I'll make this 9 a.m. Now there is a bug in this form where it's not actually, I think it's using a different, it's a different time, but if I click on the calendar now and refresh it, you should see that the item for next week there is there, and it's off by 7 hours because it's Greenwich Mean Time or something silly. We've got a bug in the form, we need to fix it. We just threw this together at the end, but you can see how it added that value to the calendar there for the weekly webinar. Now, and you can see it got the description in there and everything. It did. The only thing that was broken are the start and the end time. And we'll try to fix that before we send the sample to you. Let's take a look at the sample real quick. So the sample here, if I can pull it up here, where's the sample? So here's the sample. What we're doing on submit is we're actually formatting the date in the format that SharePoint likes. And we're using a format date command to do that. It's a bit complicated, the expression that is, and here it is. So it's, let me try this one more time here. So one more time. So it's a concat. We're concating, and we're concating the results of the format date expression, and we're inserting the value from the form. So in this case, the start date and time. And the format we're using is YYYY-MM-DDT. It's very similar to the XML format, but it's slightly different. So therefore, it integrates well with the calendar, and you can see that it did, with the exception that the date is wrong. I'm sorry, the time is wrong. So the date was correct. Any questions on that? So that's how you submit to a calendar list. We did the demos. Now we're at Q&A. It looks like we might have a question or a comment. I'm opening it up. So question from Dick. Normally, you're getting info from Active Directory People Picker on SharePoint's copy. No? Let's see. I don't quite understand the question. Let me see if I can understand this here. Maybe if you could clarify that, Dick, that would be great. I see, Active Directory People Picker or SharePoint's copy. So I still don't understand this notion. Active Directory is a way to manage people's information, address list, right? So this form that we demoed is a bit contrived. You wouldn't actually be using this form to manage your Active Directory. I guess maybe that's the answer to your question. We did this form mainly to show you how you map to those special columns, right? So just ignore kind of what the form does. It does help you manage which departments people are in, but normally you'd use Active Directory for that. So maybe that's why it's confusing. Thanks. The other question here, we had two more questions. Actually, I guess, Michael, you've got a question. Michael says, what is the source for the people information? Well, that's the SharePoint address information, right, from Active Directory. Obviously, SharePoint synchronizes with Active Directory. So SharePoint has the user profile service built into it, and inside of that, there are properties from Active Directory. So that's what we're using. We're using the People Picker, which uses the user profile information in SharePoint. And I think that answers the question. So yeah, SharePoint 2013 used the GAL, but I understand that SharePoint Online uses a different, well, yeah, so SharePoint Online 365 uses a very similar technique, but because it's tenancy-based, you don't have as many properties. You don't have the ability to customize the properties as much, although you do have a little bit. So you use the same technique, user profile service by name on SharePoint on 365, and you will be able to get the person's information and their manager information on 365. Maybe what we'll do is we'll show you that next week, because that is a very good point to make, is that there is the same information in 365. And yeah, definitely you don't want to be using username. So we're not using username, we're using the People Picker. But if you use username, it will correspond to the information, and you can use username to get the information from the user profile service. You just need to make sure you strip out some of the prefix information before you pass it in. And then you can get the user's manager information. I think we'll be doing a demo next week where we show how to get the manager information for your forms. anyway, hopefully that made sense. It's really great having everyone here. Once again, we are doing this webinar again next week. We'll be talking about metadata. We'll be doing an additional demo to show you 365 user information, hopefully. And then 2 weeks from now, we're doing a webinar on, what is it, 2 weeks from now, we're doing a webinar on timesheets, actually time cards, and how to remind people that their time cards are due. We have another Microsoft Flow webinar showing you how to do that. It's been very well attended in the last couple sessions, so we're anxious to do a third session for you. For those of you interested in Flow, we are really digging deep into Microsoft Flow right now. We really like what it's doing, and it is a great way to augment your SharePoint online workflows and logic. It's not a great replacement for InfoPath, but it is a great way to augment SharePoint workflows. So Hillary will be doing that in 2 weeks' time. Please answer the really short survey, and we'll get these samples out to you later today. We really appreciate you being here, and I want to thank Dawn and Mel especially for creating these demos that you saw. I could not have done this without them. Dawn, thank you very much for putting all this together. We have a document that Dawn wrote, and I'll be including that in the package that we send. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. Take care.